Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something that could really hit your wallets?
Oh, what's that?
We're talking about President Trump's proposed 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've heard a little about that.
This isn't just some political game. This could directly affect what you pay for things like cars, gas, even that guacamole for your next party.
Yeah, that's a pretty wide range of stuff.
We dug into an AP News article that breaks down which everyday items might see the biggest price hikes. I have to admit, I was surprised by a lot of what I learned while prepping for this deep dive.
Oh, like what?
For instance, did you know the U.S. actually does more trade with Canada and Mexico combined than with China? It's a lot more connected than I initially realized.
Yeah, it's true. The North American economies are incredibly integrated.
So it's a pretty big deal then.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Think about it. In 2023 alone, over $1.8 trillion in goods flowed between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
Wow, that's way more than I would have guessed. That's way more than the U.S. trade with China in the same period, which is only $643 billion.
Huh. That really puts things in perspective. And the article uses this really striking analogy, comparing tariffs to throwing a grenade into this intricate web of trade,
Okay, I like that.
especially when it comes to the auto industry. They describe these complex processes as cross-border supply chains, which basically means how parts and products move between countries to make the cars we buy.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely a complicated process. To give you a concrete example, over 20% of the cars sold in the U.S. are actually built in Canada or Mexico. And here's where it gets interesting. The engines for some iconic American vehicles, like Ford F-Series trucks and even Mustangs, are actually made in Canada.
You're kidding! I had no idea some of those classic American cars relied on Canadian parts.
Yeah, it's true.
So if these tariffs go through, what kind of impact are we talking about?
Well, experts estimate these tariffs could add an extra $3,000 to the price of a new car. And when you consider that the average new car already costs around $50,000, and even used cars are averaging $26,000, that's a pretty significant jump.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be noticeable. And it's not just cars, right? This whole tariff situation could also affect something else we all use every day: gasoline.
Oh, right. Yeah, I read about that.
While prepping for this, I learned something that really surprised me. Canada is actually America's biggest oil supplier.
Really?
Why is that?
It comes down to the type of crude oil. Many U.S. refineries, particularly those in the Midwest, are designed to process heavier crude oil, the kind Canada produces.
Oh, I see.
It's different from the lighter crude that comes from U.S. fracking operations. It's just not a good fit for those refineries. So we rely on Canada to keep things running smoothly.
So we're really dependent on Canadian oil, and these tariffs could throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah, for sure.
What kind of consequences are we looking at?
The potential consequences are significant. We could see gas prices jump by anywhere from 30 to 70 cents per gallon. And the Midwest, the region most reliant on that Canadian crude, would be hit the hardest.
That's a big deal, especially for folks who are already struggling with the high cost of living. And speaking of things that could hit your wallet, let's talk about food.
Okay, yeah, food is huge.
Get ready to pay more for your guacamole because the U.S. imports a whopping 90% of its avocados from Mexico. So that means that delicious guacamole you're planning for your next party.
Oh, man.
Yeah, there's a good chance those avocados will be hit by the tariffs, meaning you'll be paying more.
And you have to remember, grocery store margins are already incredibly thin. So any price increases are likely to be passed directly on to consumers. And it's not just avocados.
Right.
We also get about 63% of our imported vegetables and 47% of our imported fruits and nuts from Mexico.
So yeah, get ready for some potentially pricier grocery runs.
Yeah, it's not looking good.
That's not good news for anyone who enjoys eating, which is, well, everyone. But let's not forget about the folks on the other side of the equation: American farmers. When we impose tariffs, it's pretty much guaranteed that our trading partners will retaliate, right?
Exactly. We saw this play out during the first Trump administration. Remember when China and others slapped tariffs on U.S. agricultural products like soybeans and corn in response to U.S. tariffs?
Oh, yeah?
Well, American farmers took a major hit. It got so bad that the government had to step in with taxpayer-funded bailouts for farmers who were losing sales.
And I imagine farmers would much rather earn their living through open markets than rely on government assistance.
Absolutely. The article quotes a Nebraska farmer saying, "We'd rather get our money from the market. It doesn't feel great to get a government check."
It's understandable why they'd feel that way. Relying on government handouts instead of earning a living through trade isn't a sustainable solution in the long run. It just highlights how these tariffs can create a ripple effect, harming multiple sectors of the economy.
Exactly. It's definitely a complicated issue with a lot of moving parts.
Okay, so we've got more expensive cars, higher gas prices, and pricier grocery bills. Is there anything else these tariffs could affect? I'm starting to feel like I need a drink just thinking about all this.
Well, that's actually a great segue because
Yeah.
those tariffs could also affect what you're sipping on. Prepare to pay more for your celebratory tequila shots and Canadian whiskey cocktails.
Oh, no, not my margaritas. Okay, so just how much tequila and Canadian whiskey do we actually import? I have to admit, I don't usually think about where my drinks come from.
Oh, be ready for this. In 2023, the U.S. imported a whopping $4.6 billion worth of tequila and $108 million worth of mezcal from Mexico. And when it comes to Canadian spirits, we're talking about $537 million in imports, with whiskey accounting for $202.5 million that.
Wow, that's a lot of tequila. And those numbers make it clear that we rely pretty heavily on our neighbors for our cocktail hour. But I'm guessing this doesn't just affect what we drink here in the US, it also impacts what we export to those countries, right?
Absolutely. Canada and Mexico are actually the second and third largest importers of U.S. spirits, right behind the European Union. So if they decide to retaliate with their own tariffs on American-made spirits, it could have a huge impact on distilleries and jobs right here at home.
So it's like a double whammy for the spirits industry. They're getting hit on both imports and exports.
Precisely. And to make matters even more complicated, the U.S. is already facing a potential 50% tariff on American whiskey from the European Union, set to take effect in March. Adding tariffs from Canada and Mexico on top of that could be absolutely devastating for the industry.
It sounds like the Distilled Spirits Council is pretty worried about all of this.
They are. Their argument is that while they support protecting American jobs, tequila and Canadian whiskey, like Kentucky bourbon, are designated as distinctive products. They can only be made in their country of origin. So slapping tariffs on these products wouldn't boost American production, it would just hurt U.S. consumers. They also argue that these tariffs could lead to job losses in the U.S. hospitality industry, an industry still recovering from the pandemic.
So basically, trying to protect American jobs in one area could end up jeopardizing American jobs in another. It's complicated.
It really highlights the complexities and potential unintended consequences that can arise from protectionist trade policies.
All right, so we've covered cars, gas, groceries, and now even our drinks are on the chopping block. This is a lot to take in. Can we step back for a second and talk about the big picture? What does this all mean for us, the average consumer?
The main takeaway here is that these tariffs aren't just some abstract political game. They have the potential to hit your wallet in a very real way. We've seen how they could impact everything from the price of a new car to the cost of your next margarita.
And we can't forget about the potential for retaliation. This whole thing could spiral into a full-blown trade war, and that would have consequences far beyond just higher prices.
Exactly. This raises some serious questions about whether these tariffs are the right approach. Are they truly the best way to address trade imbalances? Or are there other, more nuanced and less disruptive solutions out there?
It's definitely a question worth thinking about. And on that note, I think it's time to shift gears and explore another angle of this whole tariff situation. Okay, so we've talked about how these tariffs could impact everything from our cars to our cocktails. But what about the bigger picture? We're talking about potentially disrupting trade relationships that have been in place for decades.
That's right. It's important to remember that trade isn't just about economics. It's about diplomacy, too. These tariffs could strain relationships with our closest neighbors and trading partners.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen. It's like when you have a disagreement with a friend. You know it can put a strain on the whole relationship.
Exactly. And when you consider that Canada and Mexico are not only our biggest trading partners, but also key allies on issues like security and immigration, these tariffs could have far-reaching consequences.
It makes you wonder if there are other ways to address trade imbalances without resorting to tariffs, which seem to create so many ripple effects.
There are definitely other approaches. For example, some economists argue for strengthening existing trade agreements, investing in worker training and infrastructure, and addressing currency manipulation. These are complex issues, but they're worth exploring as alternatives to these potentially damaging tariffs.
It seems like we're quick to reach for the tariff lever, but maybe we need to be more thoughtful about the potential consequences.
I agree. It's crucial to have a balanced approach. While there may be times when tariffs are a necessary tool, we shouldn't underestimate their potential to disrupt economies and strain relationships.
It's definitely a lot to think about. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that these tariffs aren't just some abstract political issue. They have the potential to impact our lives in very real and tangible ways. Whether it's the price of our cars, the cost of our groceries, or even the availability of our favorite drinks, these tariffs could hit our wallets and disrupt our daily routines.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we need to pay attention to what's happening in the world of trade and politics. It's not just some distant thing that doesn't affect us.
Exactly. We all have a stake in this.
Yeah.
We need to stay informed, engage in these discussions, and let our elected officials know how we feel about these issues.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. What are your thoughts on these proposed tariffs? How do you think they might impact your life? Share your perspectives with us, and let's continue this important dialogue.
And remember, knowledge is power. The more informed we are as individuals, the better equipped we are to navigate these complex issues and advocate for policies that benefit everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.